Hey guys, welcome to Drawing with Avi. In today's video, we're going to be continuing our drawing series of drawing Black Canary in my Samsung Tab S6 in Artflow. In this video, we're going to be covering the coloring stage of the illustration. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and crop the image. And the reason why I'm going to do this is so that I'm able to use that selection tool to define the overall silhouette of the figure. To use the selection tool in Artflow, you go ahead and use the selection icon in the right menu. However, you also have to be mindful of the selection mode. It's a sub-menu that's located on the top right in Artflow, and this is going to help you add or remove selections. So once you have your selection, create a new layer and flat that out with a single color. I'm using a flesh tone since the majority of the illustration or of the figure has flesh tones in its color scheme. And then I will be going in and filling out some of the other colors or flat colors I'll be using. So mostly I'm going to be using a combination of grays and blacks to fill out Black Canary's color scheme, and then also coloring her hair. So one thing I wanted to quickly note is that I'm speeding up this video by about 120%. So I believe it's roughly around 18 minutes right now. The original runtime for this drawing was just under an hour. So if you're counting, my sketch stage took about anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes to get a good sketch going. From there, the inking stage took roughly an hour, and the colors took roughly an hour. So about 2.5 hours in total to complete this illustration. I'm not able to have that kind of stretch of free time to work on illustrations anymore. So that whole process was broken up on, let's say, a course of 2 days with different drawing sessions. Coloring characters that have a lot of black in their costumes can be kind of difficult, and you could struggle with finding proper hues or shades of different types of blacks just to separate certain elements. For me, what I like to do is I like to alternate between cooler or warmer grays, and that helps me create some separation of the different types of black materials in the illustration. So what I mean by cooler or warmer grays is when you're in your color hue selection, if let's say you're on a red hue, but that you're going to go ahead and select a gray within the red hue, that's a warmer color. If you want to switch something to slightly more cooler, you can shift over to a blue color range or a purple color range if you still want to stay slightly warm, and then select a gray within that hue selection. And that's going to help you really create different types of grays that you can use. Even though you're having gray on top of gray or black on top of black, you're still going to be able to create some sort of separation just through the flats alone. When coloring the hair, especially with blonde or brunette colors, I like to keep something that's fairly muted. I'll go back in after we've completed the flattening stage and maybe add some brighter highlights to the hair. But I like to work with a base that's fairly muted in its yellow or browns, just so that it looks a little bit more naturalistic versus going super bright, like bright platinum blonde with it. I like to start working off with sort of something that has a little bit more browns, a little bit more earthiness to the colors, and then build on top of that. Okay, so right now I've noticed something wrong with my inks. So instead of ignoring it and just focusing on the colors, I'm gonna go ahead and make those changes to my inking layer. And that's something I really just wanna highlight, is that no matter where you are in your process or in your workflow, just make sure that you're always constantly critically analyzing your illustrations, and don't be afraid to make adjustments. If you feel like there's something wrong with the overall sketch of the drawing or pose or where the arm is, go ahead and make those changes. It's never too late, especially when you're working visually. So now I'm ready to start applying my shading to this illustration. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to select one of my marker brushes in Artflow, and then go ahead and start applying the shaded areas on top of my flat layer. For the shaded area, I'm going to be using a slightly warmer color tone. Here you're seeing I'm using like a reddish purple color. Typically I'll use a blue color, but I wanted to try something different for this illustration. As you can tell, the brush that I'm using has a very hard edge to it, which is great when I'm dealing with harsh shadows, but for certain areas, I'm going to want to soften that up. So I'm going to use a softer brush, maybe a brush with a little bit of texture to it, and use that with my eraser tool and sort of sculpt away in here. The light source of this illustration is to the right of the character, just slightly above her, and I'm trying to be as consistent as possible with the shading with that. In terms of any tips and tricks in terms of light sources, really the only real trick to it is practice. Making sure that you spend a lot of time, whether if it's in a live drawing session or looking up some reference photos and doing some studies, just understand how light works across anatomy, across different types of shapes. It can be a little tedious sometimes, but really it pays off like huge dividends when you invest that time. Again, not really any super tricks, but you will notice that light does some odd things in certain areas. Like for example, the face here. You'll see I've always noticed on the corners of the eyes, no matter what shadows being casted across the face, there's always a little bit of light that always creeps up below the eyes to the tear ducts. There's always a little bit of a highlight of light there. So that's one of those things that you only truly notice until you've done a lot of studies and done a lot of practice. So you can see here, I've gone ahead and changed the blending mode of the layer. So in Artflow, the way you do that is you just double tap on the layer. It will reveal a sub menu where you're able to change the blending mode. And for the shading, I've selected, I believe, multiply for the blending mode, and then brought that down in terms of opacity, roughly around 50%, just so that the shadows aren't super harsh, but it clearly defines some shapes. And then what you see me doing here is something that I've been doing a lot recently, which is coloring my lines. There's a couple of ways of doing this, but the way that I like the best is by creating a new layer on top of my ink layer, and I'm going to clip my mask to the layer below. So there's in Artflow, you simply do this by by long pressing or double tapping on the layer in the layer menu. it reveals a secondary menu and it gives you the option to put your mask. This allows me to brush in the color of my choice across my illustration with it only showing up on where I have my inking lines. So this is huge in terms of speeding up the process. I don't have to be super careful about it. I can just brush in where I want lines to be colored or not. It also offers that control of being able to be very selective of where I want those color lines to show up. Now, in terms of selecting the colors itself, one thing I would advise is to sample your darkest area or the darkest shade of the area that you're trying to apply a new line color to, and go slightly darker than that. You don't want to be using a line color that's going to be lighter than those shaded areas, just because it won't look very nice. So you can see here with the flesh tones, I use sort of a darker tan color that stands out against those shaded areas. And then for the hair, you can see I went even with a darker brown to make sure that you can still see those lines visible against the colored flats of the hair, as well as the shaded areas for the hair, but then be able to sort of indicate that, you know, there's still texture, there's still some sort of information there being described by the line art. So here I'm going to start adding highlights to my drawings. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can create a new layer on top of your shading layer and then add in some highlights. But the way that I like to do it is to add a layer above everything else. And this is including my line art layer. And I'm able to brush in some highlights. In terms of color selection, there's a couple of ways you can do this. You can select the lightest area of your illustration and then go a hue value higher than that. For me, I like to use yellows and whites to indicate the highlights, just to indicate some sort of more natural lighting. But you know, you have to be mindful of and critical, and just think critically about the environment or the situation that you want your illustration to communicate. So here I want something a little bit more warm, a little bit more vibrant. So that's why I'm sticking with the yellows and the whites to highlight certain elements of the drawings. One area that you always want to make sure that you're going to add some of these more harsher highlights is in the eyes. Just add a little bit of those highlights right in the pupil. It just adds a little bit more life, a little bit more character to the illustration. So here you can see I'm switching my brush. I was using more of a softer, chalky brush to describe those highlights, but now in the hair, to sort of indicate, you know, those individual strands of the hair, I'm going to be using more of a pen-like brush. And I'll go back and you'll see me use that pen brush to describe some more highlights. With the hair, you can see that I didn't describe every single strand of hair. Instead, what I'm trying to do is just to hint at it, just to imply all those shapes and all those textures. So you'll just see me just describe a few elements there. But then here within the leather, I'm doing the same thing. I'm not going to go over and highlight every single area of the illustration where I'm going to believe that there should be a highlight. Instead, I'm just going to highlight areas to just indicate the shape, indicate that there's folds and creases within that material. And you'll see me repeat that process throughout the illustration. So right now I'm switching my blending mode for my shading layer back to normal, just because I've noticed some areas that I wanted to add some more shading back into the illustration. And again, I think I've mentioned this many times in the previous videos, and I'll say it again here. Just, you know, always be critical about your illustrations, and if there's ways you can improve it and you see abilities to improve it, don't ignore it. even though it might take a little bit of extra work, it's always worth doing the work. So you can see here, I'm using the negative space of the flat layers to do a selection, and then using that selection, I'm deleting all the unnecessary lines. And I'm experimenting with the blending mode for the shading layer. Just try out different blending modes. Soft light, hard light, multiply are usually my go-tos when it comes to blending mode, but try different blending modes out and see if it gets the look that you like, and then you can go ahead and apply those. So here I am starting a new layer. I'm using the same method of adding a blending mode to that layer, but instead of using more harsher brush, I'm using a softer brush just to soften up the skin tones and just make sure that it looks a little bit more natural than sort of the cartoony vibe that it had previously. So one key element of Black Canary's costumes is her fishnets. It's an iconic part of her outfit. So sometimes if I know that I'm going to be adding specific elements to an illustration, I might think about ahead of time how I want to handle those elements. So in this particular case, the fishnets, I wanted to not do those at the inking stage. Instead, I knew I wanted to do it at the coloring stage, because I wanted to create a new layer, apply the fishnet lines as you see here, not being super careful where if those lines are exceeding the silhouette of the character, but just going in, adding those details of the lines themselves. And then you're gonna see me play around with erasing the lines, maybe softening some of the lines in the highlight areas, and then I'm going to lower the opacity and change the blending mode of this fishnets to make it more of a texture rather than an outline of the outfit. So this illustration is pretty much done at this stage. That was me drawing Black Canary from start to finish completely in Artflow on my Samsung Tab S6. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If there's anything that you guys found confusing or wanted me to get into more detail about, please leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll definitely try to address that either with a comment or with a new video. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button. But until next time, keep drawing.